8 minutes and 46 seconds. That is how long Derek Chauvin held down George Floyd with his knee pressed on his neck. This horrific act sparked countless protests across the United States and the world. These protests were incredibly divisive. They were criticized. Many viewed these organized marches as a sign of a broken America. But that's not what I saw. What I saw was millions of people exercising the freedoms given to them in the First Amendment of the United States Constitution. Today, I will be talking to you about the importance of protesting to our country. First, I'll provide some historical background for the First Amendment and the freedoms it provides in reference to our right to protest. Next, I'll give some examples of how various protests have changed this country for the better. And then, I will show you what happens when a country is not given these freedoms. So to start, let's discuss the historical background and context surrounding the First Amendment and our right to protest. The Founding Fathers were rugged individualists. They believed that people should be able to control what they do with their lives, rather than the government telling them what to do. And they wanted to make sure that the government would never take away their voice, especially if it was controversial or unpopular. Individuality and the freedoms given in the First Amendment to protect it is one of the oldest and most essential American values. The Founding Fathers made sure that we would be able to voice our opinions about how our government is running and other issues that are important to us, because that is the sign of a healthy democracy. And we've actually seen our country grow from them in the past, which brings me to my second point. We have seen some incredible public demonstrations in the past. On March 3rd, 1913, we saw women from across the country organize a parade in Washington, D.C. to campaign for women's suffrage. On August 28th, 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. led the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. This huge protest led to national attention and the ultimately passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And more recently, in 2018, hundreds of thousands of students marched on D.C. in the March for Our Lives to protest gun violence and the lack of gun control legislation following the Stoneman Douglas shooting. All three of these are examples of where a group of people decided to make their voice heard, and they were actually able to inspire real change. And I think that is beautiful. And I think that's something that we really take for granted. Which brings me to my next point. In 2019, millions of people in Hong Kong protested a new bill that would allow the Chinese government to extradite people in Hong Kong back to mainland China to face trial. These protests were not received well by China. The government used incredibly harmful rhetoric to demean the protesters and liken them to terrorists, even though most of these demonstrations were completely peaceful. In 2020, China tried to silence Hong Kong for good by signing the National Security Law into Act. This law is a huge blow to the freedoms and human rights to those in Hong Kong. It effectively strips Hong Kong citizens of their free speech and the right to protest. Many have been arrested for protesting and campaigning for Hong Kong independence, and anyone advocating for pro-democracy policies could end up in jail. Here in the U.S., these freedoms are commonplace. They're protected by our Constitution. The First Amendment is a blessing beyond anything that we can even comprehend. It really shows as we look at these saddening examples from Hong Kong. To conclude, here in the U.S., we have been given a gift. The First Amendment provides us with priceless freedoms that we take for granted every day. Too many people looked at the protests this past summer and saw them as a negative. They thought America was broken and needed to be fixed. But what they failed to realize is that protesting is how we fix what's broken in this country. So the next time you see people lining the streets with their signs and megaphones, instead of criticizing that movement, I encourage you to take the time and learn about it. Find out what problem they're trying to solve. And just know that these people are exercising their constitutional rights to be heard. Because that is what the United States of America and democracy is all about. Thank you.